We mentioned it at the outset. The situation in Gaza remains extremely dire. Latest count, I've seen at least 51 people killed today, and we know that essentially everyone there, millions of people on the verge of starvation, and many, many other challenges due to the aid issue. And we are very, very honored to be joined here once again, giving us some of his time by Afeef Nessouli, who's a humanitarian medical worker in Gaza. Afeef, thank you so much for being with us again.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
Well, the honor is all ours. And as we mentioned, you are on the ground there in Gaza, the blockade, which has been going on for, I think, over 70 days. We're now hearing in the United States that some trucks are getting in. I'm just curious from your point of view, is there any change? Is this addressing the crisis? How do you respond to some of those stories?
So from what I understand, as of earlier today, around 80 trucks have entered since the announcement that aid would be allowed in, which is not even close to even a fraction of what would be sufficient. I remind you, it's been since March 2nd that nothing has gotten into Gaza. So there's a lot of making up to do. There's a lot of on the verge of starvation there's a lot of an incredible dearth of supplies. Like there is just nothing to buy at the market. There's only food and water that have been approved. No entry of medical supplies, no fuel, cooking gas, shelter items, like essentials that people need because of all of the displacement, which we can get to in a second. But this isn't, the households aren't getting this distribution of aid, right? This means that like the 80 trucks that have just entered, the supplies are going to WFP bakeries for bread and UN partnered community kitchens. So people still have to like exactly wait in incredibly crowded bakeries and kitchens for food, and it's extremely undignified and it's hard because there's just not enough to go around, and that obviously causes a lot of tension and pressure. So a lot of people aren't getting food; they're just having to go without or have one meal a day. So the conditions here are extremely scary. They've just gotten worse and worse and worse over time, and honestly, it's hard to watch people be so hungry and to feel that hunger even in myself because there just isn't a lot of food around. And just seeing people who have been struggling from bombs and displacement having to also just fight hunger pains is extremely overwhelming.
Afeef, you're also experiencing a part of this. It's such a crazy thing to ask you, but I need to ask you from your vantage point when it comes to food, water, medical supplies, like, can you expand on how bad is it? Are people dying of starvation? I mean, we see some numbers are coming out of people having died of starvation. There's pictures of hollowed faces and just really skinny bodies that are, Holocaust reminiscent. What's it like for families trying to survive? I mean, you described the sort of undignified manner of having to crowd around for things. And, we've seen some of these images coming out in the media of people holding out like saucepans just for anything in just complete desperation. And I guess, how do you and your team manage to eat and function yourselves in this environment?
Yeah, so I definitely want to highlight some numbers that are important. There are around 70 community kitchens that are barely open. That's like that's trying to serve like 12 to 15% of the population out of 2.1 million people. That's basically 300,000 people that they're even trying to serve. But there's nothing come in since March 2nd. So that's extremely like a big point. And 80% of croplands have been destroyed. 50% of farm irrigation has been destroyed. 72% of fishing has been destroyed. 95% of cattle have been killed. So yes, people are literally dying of hunger. I think 57 kids formally, I think on the record, have died of hunger. There has been controversial news around 14,000 babies being really, really food insecure. I think that people are getting lost in the semantics of like when people die and how they die. And these kinds of situations are so incredibly dire that there are many steps and people are already dying from starvation. People are dying because they're hungry and they can't get their temperatures down. 90% of households are water insecure. Do you know how much you need water for so many things that as they're insecure, also 75% have reported that it's just getting worse every day. So I think that what's also important is that like sanitation is also a part of this story. 89% of like the water and sanitation assets have been destroyed. So I've seen personally people emaciated. I've seen people eating food off of the ground or begging. There's so many kids that come, knocking on our car door or on our door because we're kind of known to be an international NGO. We might have something for them to have, but literally we don't. We don't have flour when they come knocking. We don't have something to share because we're also hoping to get something at the market, which is exorbitant. There's no cash. So it's a lot of maneuvering that looks like really unsatisfying one meals a day for the luckiest among us. And that is hard for me personally because I'm obviously a consumerist Westerner who's experiencing this, and this is extremely difficult on my experience. But the part that's just undeniable is watching other people also struggle because they've lost family, they're displaced. There's just so many layers at once, and the hunger is acute and it's violent. It's really violent.
Well, I mean, it just speaks to the compounding reality that's there because, of course, the bombings have not stopped. They've continued apace along with other military operations. And I guess that's maybe another question, what it's like to endure these kind of airstrikes while people are also starving, and the sort of combination of that sort of violence of famine and the violence of bombing and what that does to a person.
Yeah, I mean, we're dealing with a lot of explosive injuries, lacerations to organs, like stuff like that. You need food for, like you have to get your temperature down, you need calories. But in terms of anecdotes, like I was washing the dishes the other day and there was an attack in Deir el-Belah and it literally pushed me back. And it was the closest I've come to like a dangerous call. I mean, there are bombs and missiles all the time, but I mean one that I physically felt the energy from, the pressure from. The other night, it felt like there was a quadcopter in my face for until 3 a.m. It's
Wow.
so torturous. I don't think these quadcopters need to sound like that. I think that they're made to sound like that. So you have bombs that are not stopping. You have quadcopters that are getting people that are unarmed civilians running either home from getting something from the bakery or something of the sort. And then you have all of this displacement, and then you have all of this hunger. So it's like I said, it's layers of stamina, of like hopelessness, of literally physical pain, and also grief because so many people are dying. We all know someone who has either passed or someone who is grieving, someone who is in the hospital in a coma. There is just so much pain right now that it's hard to put into words, obviously.
You know, Afeef, there's also been, as I'm sure you've seen, reports that some of the very limited aid coming in is being looted. You'll have this like obsessive focus, especially by the Israelis, on like Hamas is going to loot the aid. But in this case, there's reports about aid being looted or obstructed by these sort of criminal gangs, and actually possibly with Israeli cooperation. And I'm just curious, what's the word on the street there? Are you hearing anything about that from the people around you?
I think in this sort of situation, you have to, okay, so 80% of the strip is like a red zone, which means everyone's just 3 governorates just got displaced this week. It's like the largest displacement orders, I think, since. So everyone is crowding. Everyone is extremely hungry. There's no way that you can responsibly say that this isn't a strategy of the war for people to start fighting and having civil conflict, because there is nothing. And you really care about your family first. And also there's instability psychologically. Like people are hungry and they're scared and they're tired. So the fact of the matter is we just put that to the side. There have been reports that there are collaborators. Of course, there are something like that in every society where you kind of are familiar with the types of men who are just going to be like, you know what? I am going to work with the only people that have control, and that's the Israelis. They're literally controlling everything from the air, water, and land. And there are some people that have always collaborated with them. I think that it's really funny that there's a lot of blame on Hamas all the time when it's actually really seemingly their eyewitness accounts of Palestinians entering Rafah, where it's like the Palestinians that could be entering Rafah have to be like maybe possibly definitely collaborating, because how else would they be able to enter? And so it's kind of like, it's kind of all hard to say on the record and tell you that I know for sure, because I don't know for sure. But I think it's quite obvious that in a situation like this, you're going to have people who are the haves working with the haves, and the haves are Israel. They're not Hamas right now. That's just not what's going on. And I think that that's just, human nature, and Palestinians have the right to be betrayers sometimes too. They're just like everyone else.
We're starting to see some governments speak out, the EU, other sort of European countries condemning the use of starvation as a weapon. I'm curious, I guess, two questions. I mean, one, how are people in Gaza responding to seeing some of these points that are now being made? And I think maybe related to that, what are the things do you think that people there on the ground really want people to understand, or that you yourself want people to understand about what's happening right now, as opposed to how it's mediated by the media oftentimes?
I do think that there's a psychological layer here that we do know very well about, but one that we don't always talk about is like the hope, and then the crash of the hope, which was the ceasefire looked like it was just on its way. The hostage, the American military, IDF soldier, was about to be, is the bargaining chip, and everybody was hoping, and then it's gotten worse than ever. And then you hear the UK and Canada doing these new sort of moves, or the UK kind of going harder, and I think people are grasping for anything. So I don't want to say that they're not paying attention and they're not hoping, but I do think that the acute pain of what they're experiencing means that they're not really focusing on, colonizers being their saviors anymore. I think that like it constantly and consistently like is just a disappointment. However, I do think that they believe that that is just the governing bodies and not the people, not the nations that have stood by their side. I think that they're very aware of the limitation of how much the world's support like how much, although that there has been so much support, how limited it has been in actually saving their physical lives. But with that being said, the international pressure is what's working. So I think that they want people to hold the line. I think that they want people to go harder. I think that they need help. This place needs help. And I think also it's important to say, it's about Gaza. It's about people in Gaza. It's not about us. I think the sometimes we get really, we have the habit of making things about our feelings and how we feel about what we're doing, but people are literally dying. It's urgent. I think the things that we need to do need to be strategic and need to really focus on helping people not be starved and not be killed by unnecessary amounts of airstrikes. And I think, honestly, to close, it's just keep the international pressure as hard as possible, because it seems like it could be working, but we just have to wait and see.
Well, Afeef, we really appreciate you joining us several weeks in a row. In fact, just crucially important, and we know that there's so much happening there. So Afeef Nessouli, humanitarian medical worker in Gaza, thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.